Ambassador, so the hot topic in Ukraine is the UN peacekeepers, but you raise some of the concerns, and also we know the decision depends on Russia. So it's important to be pragmatic and realistic in how much Ukraine can achieve in that. So what are the things you're concerned?
I think that President Putin's proposal by itself is inadequate, but it could be an opening for a serious negotiation over a mandate that could lead to a force that would not only end the violence, but implement the Minsk agreements and restore Ukrainian control over the Donbas. So it's an opportunity that can't be ignored. But I think for any peacekeeping force to be credible, it would have to have access to all of the territory that's now occupied by the self-declared separatist regimes. I mean, we may find out very quickly that the whole thing is purely a PR maneuver designed to give Russia the appearance of being a peacemaker, but actually aimed at prolonging or alternatively freezing the conflict. And either would be an unacceptable outcome. I think many skeptics say that it is just to freeze the conflict because the proposal would put the peacekeepers only on the line of contact, which would basically turn that into an international border and do nothing to bring about the withdrawal of the puppet regimes and restoration of Ukrainian sovereignty.
So you've written and mentioned your observation about the contact line. So what are also the things it's already some time since it exists. You can say it's not a border, but really you raised the issue that the status quo isn't really the best for all.
No, having had a very brief visit to the contact line a couple of weeks ago, I could see firsthand that it's maintaining a kind of a reduction of violence, but it hasn't ended the violence. We see daily shelling. There's areas where the two sides are depending on each other for water and electricity, and of course they don't trust each other. Infrastructure is collapsing. So it's not a satisfactory situation. So for humanitarian reasons, but also given that Russia signed up to the Minsk agreements, we should insist on finding a real solution. And the Russians need to understand that they'll never see a serious improvement in U.S.-Russian relations unless the Donbas is solved. That is for me the sine qua non for any improvement in U.S.-Russian relations.
And there is a feeling of not just some frustration by some of the Ukrainian population that during the escalation and from the very beginning there was not enough and not fast enough adequate response from the West, including the NATO. That much could have been done if things had been done on time, not way later. Having your position, being in the leadership of NATO, now being not in that position, what do you think could have been done differently? Do you regret some of the things?
Well, realistically, I don't think it was ever in the cards that NATO would actually intervene militarily to prevent the Russian aggression and the illegal annexation of Crimea. But perhaps a stronger response immediately to what they did could have perhaps discouraged them from the next step, which was the sponsorship of this aggression and so-called separatism in the Donbas. If the Russians had paid a heavier price right on the spot for Crimea, they might have been less inclined to go ahead in eastern Ukraine. It's hard to know. Obviously, it's easy to say retrospectively that we should have seen what was coming. Putin's speech at the Munich Security Conference in 2007 made very clear that he was not satisfied with what he described as the unipolar world order and with the U.S. effort to dictate its values and its solutions to other powers, particularly Russia. And we should have learned even more that he didn't just say that. He acted upon it when he invaded Georgia in 2008. So we should have appreciated that for Putin, Ukraine's closer relationship with the European Union was just about as bad as its closer relationship with NATO, and that he would react to the setback when the Maidan occurred. But I think we never fully imagined that he would literally break international law and annex territory the way he did. But I think we've learned that lesson too, that we can't underestimate Mr. Putin.
And for the solutions, there are like two schools of thoughts about how Ukraine can build their relations with NATO. That some people would say that talking about the NATO accession for Ukraine would be provocation, and maybe you do the things slowly, silently, without doing that, and maybe even that for some time Ukraine shouldn't speak about that in order to get Crimea back, and that would be the part of the concession. The others, especially a lot of people here in Baltics, would say that, you know, Putin misuses the situation when he understands that there is a bit of the softness. So what do you would say? How much Ukraine can get at this stage from NATO? How strong it could be and might be in their, you know, public willingness to join NATO?
Well, I think it calls for a certain diplomatic nuance. On the one hand, I don't think Ukraine should be in any way shy or inhibited about saying that its ultimate ambition and its goal is to become a member of NATO, and insist that NATO allies stand by their position of principle on the open door and on the right of any country to choose its security arrangements as set forth in the Helsinki Final Act. At the same time, the fact is Ukraine isn't ready for membership today, and NATO allies are probably not ready to vote in support of Ukrainian membership today. So in practical terms, Ukraine should focus on preparing itself. Maintain the principle, but don't submit your application tomorrow. Do what I think President Poroshenko has said. Carry out the necessary work to complete defense reforms, to bring Ukrainian forces more in alignment with NATO standards, to do more exercises and training with NATO. So in a few years' time, he's talked about 2020, Ukraine may be more in a position to actually submit an application and turn this from an issue of principle into a practical issue.
Final shortly, but what would be the sign for NATO and NATO members that Ukraine is ready? Because we have the talks, Ukraine has to do its homework. But what would be the sign that the homework is more or less done?
Well, there's a complex array of criteria. There's no single thing. But I think one important benchmark would be to appoint a civilian minister of defense. I think that is ultimately seen as a test of consistency with NATO standards and traditions, to have civilian control of the military. But then there's a whole array of other professional measures of effectiveness, of interoperability, of readiness. I think cleaning out the corruption that still exists in the defense sector would be important. Well, that's the work of years, not months or days. And I think realistically, reaching some kind of political solution in the Donbas will make it easier for allies to contemplate the actual decision. If there's still kind of an undeclared war going on, realistically many allies will say, let's not decide this now, let's postpone. So I think it's in everybody's interest to try to bring about a diplomatic solution sooner rather than later. And the United States, I think by talking about providing Ukraine more defensive weapons, can help focus the Russians' minds on the reality that the situation for them will get worse rather than better the longer they delay a political solution.